Hey, good evening, everybody. Give you give you some time to jump on and join me tonight. Have some interesting stuff to talk about. Some administrative work here to take care of on the front end. I am going to have some guests coming up in the next probably couple weeks, so we'll talk about that a little bit. First thing I'm just going to do is what I do all the time. Hey, Sally. Hey, Donald. Um, like, love, share. Start pushing buttons, please. Push buttons. Let's get this out there. Get this in front of people. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Nay. Hey, everybody. Lots of people jumping on already, and we'll just give everybody a little more time. Yes, Trump very much likely did win. I guess that just depends on what the meaning of is, or win is, or however you want to look at it. Either way, no matter what, the resident of the United States White House is causing all kinds of trouble. So there we are. My phone's going crazy. All kinds of fun stuff happening tonight. So hey, so listen, everybody, one more time, like, share, get this out there. I'm going to start saying some hellos. We get some. We've got some love from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. Make America think again. Got let's see, Minnesota. Fantastic. People are liking and sharing. This is great. You guys are doing fantastic work. Thank you very much. I just want to get out there and give somebody some give folks an idea of what's really going on. So you guys know as well as I do, and I talk about this all the time on Facebook. If you follow me on there, if you've seen me on shows previously, the mainstream media lies constantly. I will tell you, as somebody with some media background, sometimes they don't lie, sometimes they're just lazy. And it's easier to pick up what the AP and Reuters and other groups are saying that they quote trust and just use what they're saying without any, you know, actual thought of their own, without any critical thinking, without any criticism, without any extra digging. They'll just use what they pull from those sources and go with it. And that's unacceptable too. So whether they're lazy or they're outright lying, it's unacceptable. Prime Time Patriots is here to help you. We're here to help get out the real news. We're here to help answer real questions, provide some real depth to the things that are happening across the country every single day. So, like I said, like and share this video. We've got Iowa, Vermont, Virginia, South Carolina, one of my favorite states in the union. Um, I love the United States. So all of you out there, there's something I love about your state. I've been to almost every state. One that I really want to go to, Arizona. I haven't been there yet. Haven't been to Alaska or Hawaii. That's probably coming down the road. But just about everywhere else. Let's see, Louisiana. Love Louisiana. Love, love, love. Arkansas, not Arkansas. No matter what the city in Kansas is called, it's Arkansas, right? Um, great, great. Illinois. Whew, Illinois. Man, there's a guy on TikTok calls himself a centrist Democrat, whatever the heck that is. Drives me absolutely nuts. He says some of the weirdest stuff, like he thinks cops, when they shoot white people, they're only shooting to slow them down or bring them down. They're not shooting to kill. Let me tell you something right out of the gate. Cops only shoot to kill. If they pull that service pistol and they use it, they're using it to stop the threat. They're aiming center mass and they want to stop the threat, and that's it. Period. They have no interest in. I don't think you can see beyond the sight to see enough of what you're shooting except for what the threat is. But anyway. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get started. Listen, here's the first thing. It's probably the biggest thing. It's the thing everybody's asked me all week. So let's just jump right into it. No sense in burying the lead. Joe Biden, the resident of the United States of America. I say resident. I have this speech impediment. Call it a stutter. I just can't quite seem to get the P on the beginning of president. So anyway, Joe Biden on on or about September 9th, 13th, 12th, who knows, somewhere early to mid-September, signed an executive order ordering administrative agencies to come up with a plan to mandate the jab across the federal bureaucracy. Okay. So I've had a lot of people ask me questions. They've asked me things like, is the Pfizer vaccine actually FDA approved? Yes, it is. I'm not going to get into the specifics. The retail name is a name that is used for the same formulation as the previous formulation that's gotten the FDA approval. Both are available in the United States. Eventually, only the retail branded version of the Pfizer vaccine will be available in the United States, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless of how you feel about the jab, it should never be mandated. So Joe Biden decides it needs to be mandated. So what power and authority does he have? Can he force folks that just live in the state of Kansas, state of Texas, anywhere, don't have anything to do with federal bureaucracy? Can he force them to get the jab? No, he can't. Can he force people who work for the federal government to get the jab? That's the question. Short answer is yes, he can, unfortunately. Why? Because Article 2 of the United States Constitution that lays out the powers of the executive, the president, says the executive authority lies within the power of the president. Okay, that may be a little bit of a paraphrase, but the reality is all executive power, the ability to execute the laws of the land, of the federal laws, reside with the president. So if Congress passes a law, it is the president's responsibility to execute that law faithfully, following the Constitution. That's the oath that Joe Biden took, whatever that means to him. So has Congress passed a law requiring the vaccine for anyone? No, they haven't. So we're obviously not talking about him executing on a law. We are talking about him writing bureaucratic rules and regulations for federal employees that fall under the administrative branch only. Period. End of discussion. Once upon a time, real quick background on how this works. There have been numerous cases, and even some as far back as the Bush presidency, about the power of the executive. Do we have a really powerful executive who has almost quasi-legislative power? Do we have a weak executive, one who can only do what Congress tells him to, or are we somewhere in between? That's a battle that's going to rage on forever. But the seminal case is one called Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. It happened back during the Korean War. I want to say like 1955, maybe 52, 53, somewhere in there. It was a case where President Truman, during the Korean War, decided that he wanted to take over steel manufacturing and force the steel manufacturers to produce steel, even though they were about to strike or they were in the middle of a strike. So, of course, the steel companies sued, the labor unions sued, everybody sued and said the president doesn't have the authority to take over private businesses during wartime. And the President Truman said, yes, I do. I do he brought up many different laws that indirectly applied to his war powers. And he tried to convince the Supreme Court, it ultimately made it to the Supreme Court. He tried to convince the Supreme Court that he had the power with or without Congress's specific authorization. Now, there was an opinion, a majority opinion written by, I believe, Justice Black, and nobody cares about that. I can tell you because I sat through constitutional law classes, and I can tell you nobody cares about Justice Black's majority opinion. What they do care about very much, because it's come up numerous times throughout history, is a concurring opinion written by Justice Jackson. Incidentally, many of you are familiar with William Rehnquist. He was actually, Chief Justice Rehnquist was a clerk for Justice Jackson, and it's always been supposed that he had a very specific and probably deep role in crafting this concurring opinion, because he often cited that case in cases that he saw as the Chief Justice. But nonetheless, Justice Jackson wrote in the concurring opinion that there's basically three different ways to look at executive power. Presidential power. Presidential power, when it lines up with what Congress wants very specifically. Congress says you are to tax whomever. The president runs the Department of the Treasury and the IRS. So the IRS is then authorized to go and execute on these taxes. That's very simple. That's an easy one. Then there's a category kind of in the middle that Justice Jackson called the Twilight Zone, aptly named, where it's not very clear what Congress really wants. You know, they maybe make something that kind of skirts around the edges of something, but it doesn't specifically give the president authority to do something. Then there's the third instance where Congress is absent, hasn't said anything. Actually, that's more the Twilight Zone. This is where the Twilight Zone is Congress is basically absent, or they've said something that doesn't directly apply. The third category is where Congress specifically has said the president doesn't have certain authority. So basically, they laid out these three, rules for looking at applying presidential power and authority. So fast forward to here, and you guys can look up the case again. It's Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. The court held that President Truman did not have that power specifically granted to by Congress or otherwise, and they ruled that he didn't have the power to take over his steel companies, just so you get a little closure on the case. But fast forward to today, we've got Joe Biden out there saying that he has the power to do certain things that people ask me, do they really? Does he have the power to do these things? Well, he has the executive power to set rules and regulations for the people who work for him. Everyone that works for the federal government that falls under the administrative branch or the executive branch under the administrative bureaucracy of the federal government works for Joe Biden, whether they like it or not. Most of them know that. I mean, your regular civil service employees that right now, most of them are working from home that work for the federal government, they know that technically Joe Biden is their boss. Well, they're right. Constitutionally, he's their boss. And if he says you have to get the jab, you have to get the jab. Now, there's certain things that courts are holding, and they've held for many, many years, that he can't violate. For example, religious exemptions, health exemptions that he specifically wrote into the executive order. So the long and short of it is he has the right and the ability under the Constitution to force the mandate on the federal bureaucracy, but he doesn't have the right to prevent people from using exemptions that have been authorized for a long, long time. There was a case out of New York where a federal judge ruled that New York couldn't prevent people from using religious exemptions. So that was the next question. I'm going to get to some of your questions in just a second, but the other question I was asked was, how do federal rights, for example, free exercise of religion, apply to state mandates and regulations, or even federal regulations and mandates? So let me explain this very, very simply. There's a hierarchy of authority under the federalist system that we've set up. So federalism, for those of you who have heard that term and don't exactly know what it means, federalism is the idea that there's various governments that have different or similar authority, all working together at the same time, together and separately. So we have the federal government, we have state governments, we have local governments. What I really want you all to understand is we really have the federal government and we have state governments. Political subdivisions in the states, cities, towns, counties, townships, whatever subdivisions are made within states, still fall within that state parameter. So we're going to talk about federal and state laws. Obviously, if the federal government does something like creates a mandate, it's got to be by an act of Congress. Okay. And even if it happens, it has to fall under constitutional requirements. So, for example, if there's a sincerely held belief or tenet within your religion that would prevent you from getting the jab, then they wouldn't be able to overcome that, because that is a constitutional derived right that you have, what lawyers call a substantive right. Now, there's ways they can overcome that. They have to be neutral laws. They have to apply to everyone the same, and so on and so forth. Um, and some of those questions are going to be heard in court over the next who knows how long, probably several years. In the meantime, we are seeing some federal courts that are granting injunctions to people because they realize if by some chance people prevail on the merits down the road in their case, but they've already been forced to get the jab, then it's a useless case to be heard. So an injunction prevents somebody from having to do a certain thing, or prevents somebody from doing a certain thing to someone else while the case is being heard. In order to get an injunction, you have to show that there's a likelihood that you'll prevail. So for this judge in New York to provide that people should be able to utilize religious exemptions, that judge would have had a finding that there's some likelihood that they will prevail on the merits and ultimately be able to use that religious exemption to prevent them from getting the jab. So what does all that mean for state law? Let's go, Brandon. For state law, you still have federal constitutional rights. Federal constitutional substantive rights overcome state laws. So if a state were to ban abortion in all forms at all times tomorrow, the Supreme Court is not going to rule if the state constitution applies and it allows them to do it. They're going to rule on whether or not the federal constitution provides protection for somebody getting an abortion at some point within, the gestational period. Same thing with the mandate. If a state requires you to get the jab somehow, somewhere, some way, but you have a religious exemption that falls under the federal constitution's free exercise provisions, you can take that to federal court and have the federal constitution applied to that state law. States can always give you more rights. This is probably the most important thing through all this rambling. States can give you more rights, but they can't give you less rights than what the federal constitution provides you. All right? So, recap a couple of things. Congress would have to pass a law mandating a vaccine outside of the federal bureaucracy for that to be applicable to everybody. They haven't done that. They're not going to do that. It's highly, highly, highly unlikely that in this circumstance, they're going to be able to overcome a very likely filibuster in the Senate to get something like that passed. And I don't think that I've ever heard Manchin or Sinema or any of the other supposedly centrist Democrats even remotely come close to the idea of a mandate going through Congress. So I don't think you have to worry about that anytime soon. These local rules and laws that are impacting people potentially down the road, maybe even our kids in schools, that's something we're going to have to take up with state governments. And really, that's what I've been saying on my Facebook for the past week, is our state legislatures, our state governors are extremely important in this process. Elections have consequences. You guys have all heard me say that numerous times. But many states that you guys live in are more conservative. And even some of the states that aren't, Illinois is a good example. They have a governor that's been, definitely harder on people in the state than some other states. But I don't see any state right now getting close to mandating vaccines for children in schools at a statewide level. Just straight up, you start school on, January 5th or whenever you come back from the break, and you have to have the jab or you can't come back to school. It is possibly happening in some states. I haven't personally seen it, but I know it's not happening right now in any of the more conservative states. And the way we prevent that is we stay on our legislators, we stay on our governors, and we make sure that they know that that's the hill that we would, as they say, die on, so to speak. We're not going to allow it. That's going to be the thing that's going to bring everybody out in droves. Tina Highland, I'm a federal nurse with previous anaphylaxis to previous vaccines, more than one. Can I be mandated with a doctor's note advising against it? So that's one of the things in Joe Biden's executive order, and I'll pull it up here and read it. But in it, it very specifically says, let me just bring it up. I want to give you the exact language. Okay. See if I can find the language for the exemptions. And see, this is what makes it very hard. If you don't go directly to the source and you pull it up on any media outlet, they've got their own spin. The important things like the exemptions, they won't talk about. So you kind of have to sort through the madness to get to what he actually ordered. Wow. 500 different news stories that I can't count on and know. You would think that the first article that would pop up would be directly to the Federal Register, where these are documented and published for the American people, but it's not. It's 500 different stories from people that Google apparently wants me to get my information from. There we go. All right. So the specific exemption is for consistent with applicable law, with exceptions only as required by law. The exceptions required by law, I'm not going to pull this up. I was looking at it earlier, are religious exemptions and obviously health exemptions. So if your doctor provides you a note that says that it's, dangerous for you to get any kind of vaccine, or that there's something about this vaccine that would provide some kind of create some kind of a problem, that should qualify under 5 USC 2105. I believe it's 2105. Don't quote me on that because I don't have all of these different US codes pulled up. There's 3301, 3302, and 7301, all in Chapter 5 of the United States Code. So you guys can go and pull those up if you want to and look at it. But it lays out exactly, what kinds of provisions apply and so on and so forth. And obviously any constitutional application like free exercise of religion would apply. They're not going to force you to get something that your doctor says no to. So I said this months ago. Your answer to somebody, if you don't want to get the jab, is that you have a medical exception. Get a note from your doctor if you can. They don't have any right under HIPAA and other applicable law that we've talked about before, actual law written by Congress. They don't have any right to do certain things to check up on your stated exemption, your claimed exemption, whether it's a health exemption or otherwise. But if you can get a doctor's note, obviously that would help you. At some point, it's going to come down to the same thing it would come down to in a private business. It's going to be you and HR trying to figure out what makes the most sense. Can they provide under the ADA a reasonable accommodation for you? Maybe the reasonable accommodation already exists. Maybe it's you working from home, which you've already been doing. If you're a federal nurse and you necessarily have to work with patients, there may be some other job that they can have you do for the near term while they figure out, what else to do with you. But expect you're probably going to face some challenges down the road if you decide to use, health or a religious exemption to avoid the jab. I mean, that just is what it is. Elections have consequences. When is enough per our Constitution to overthrow a tyrannical government. Well, our Constitution doesn't provide for that. The Declaration of Independence does. You know what our Constitution gives us the right to do? Vote. It gives us the right to run. It gives us the right to petition the government for redress of our grievances. Is so much of that so hard in today's day and age? Yes, 100%. Is it absolutely fact that there's enough shenanigans in our electoral system right now that it could at some point, or maybe has already become impossible for elections to matter? Sure, absolutely. So what do? Give up? I mean, if you're saying at some point that you think that the only answer from here is civil war, all I can do is tell you I disagree at this point. There's going to come a day, there is in every empire, there's going to come a day when you can't, the grievance is too strong, it's too neglected, you're too silenced, and at that point everybody is going to know. There won't be any question. There won't be 400 people, breaking windows and, walking through the Capitol. That won't be the case. There will be so many millions of patriots taking to the streets, well armed and ready, that there won't be any question that that's the point that we're at. I just don't think we're there yet. I said back in January, what do? What's the answer? Well, the answer is you got to petition your state legislatures, which have the power to set these laws for these elections, and you got to get them to change the laws. And that's what several have done. Arizona has done work in that regard. Wisconsin has done work in that regard. Georgia has. I mean, several states have made changes to their electoral law, as well as preventing certain COVID shenanigans from happening again in the future, which I think was a big part of what happened this past election. Lots of stuff has been done, but it's never completely done. There's one party that wants to prevent secure elections, and we can't allow that. We have to keep fighting against that, keep working towards securing our elections forever. It's always going to be a battle, because there's always going to be a group of people, just like there was in 1776, that didn't want to sign on to the Declaration of Independence. There's a group of people that would gladly trade their freedom for safety. Can I say that, Mrs. Producer? I got to get a thumbs up from the producer, or else I'm going to have to slow down, or she's going to shut me off. Can I say that? She popped up for a second, then she went away. Let's see if Mrs. Producer, am I allowed to say that? Give me a thumbs up. All right, thank you. Again, we have to keep fighting, right, Mrs. Producer? Keep fighting. We're having a little technical difficulty, but you guys get the idea. We got to keep the battle moving. It's easier to mess with a presidential election than it is an off-year congressional election. We are poised right now to win back the House, retire Nancy Pelosi, take back the Senate, and put Joe Biden on a very fast track to lame duck presidency, which is exactly where he needs to be. Then we have a lot of work to do. It's been very clear to me for a long time that every single time Democrats are in power, they move the needle. Every time Republicans are in power, we don't move the needle back at all. We don't touch the needle. In fact, sometimes we even go a little further. That's unacceptable. We made sure that people like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, you dang near lost in Kentucky. If that guy makes it to another election, I'll be shocked. I will be shocked if he does not retire and turn that job over to somebody that he's going to try to handpick. But Kentucky folks, if you're listening to me, don't allow that crap to happen. Stop letting these guys pick their backup. I would rather take a beatable Democrat for 6 years in the Senate than another Mitch McConnell. Right? All right. Now, let me get to some of these questions. I know we had some. Kaylee, if you saw any that you want to pull up here, that would be fantastic. Let's see. And here's the other thing. So Laura Gallucci, you've got on here, and this was a pretty popular news story last week as well. She says that there was a, leave that up there, Kales, and I'll talk to that one in just a second. But she says that there was a doctor that refused to treat her if she didn't get the vaccine. It's unfortunate that some doctors feel that way. The only doctors I've dealt with, I had my own personal doctor told me not to get the vaccine because I had a very bad case of COVID, and he felt like my natural immunity was more than sufficient to protect me for a long period of time. My father-in-law got the vaccine. His doctor told him, I think you should get it, and here are the reasons. But he certainly didn't say, I won't treat you if you don't get it. So it's unfortunate that doctors are doing that. The first thing I would tell you is try everything you can to find a doctor who won't do that. They're not all like that, but they're subject to their own worldviews, their own politics, and it's unfortunate. But you can't force them to treat somebody they don't want to treat. And if they want to give you preconditions for what it's going to look like to be treated by them, that's their prerogative. And under our system of commerce, if you don't want to work with them, then don't work with them. All I can say is that I feel bad for people who get in that position. It's an awful position to be in. There's a woman in Ohio that was delayed on her, I believe it was it a kidney transplant? I think it was a kidney transplant that was delayed because of the vaccine. And that kind of thing is just, it's beyond the pale to me. And frankly, those doctors, their names come up in the news. You need to remember those names. I wouldn't give them a dime. Somebody will. Fine. Let the left be the only people that go to those doctors. There's plenty of doctors out there who won't treat you that way. Jennifer says, how is it that individual businesses can judge the validity of religious exemptions? Well, what they're supposed to do is do some fact finding. So what a lot of them have been doing is requiring individuals to bring some kind of documentation. And the military has done this for years. There's people who claim to be Norse something that can have beards in the military, and they've got a religious exemption, and they have a big long written document from somebody in their clergy that allows them to do it. It's the same thing in a private business. They're usually going to require you to bring some kind of paperwork. Now, a lot of school boards have been doing this too, but the problem that they're running into is they're not judging them fairly. So there's some districts, I read about districts in Ohio, some districts have approved every religious exemption to mask wearing and potentially to the vaccine down the road. This is just pertaining to masks, but it's a very similar idea. Some have accepted every exemption and some have accepted none. What's the fairness there? Well, there's not. But somebody's going to have to sue and claim a disparate impact and prove in court that these people judged them unfairly and treated their civil right unfairly. I mean, and that may be your only recourse is to go to court. And at that point, you've got to decide if the juice is worth the squeeze. For some people, it is. We've got plenty of organizations out there willing to take your case. Look them up, find them. They're always looking for that next bit of media attention because it helps them raise money. Increase in insurance premiums if they threaten you, that it is BS. I agree, but it's going to happen, plain and simple. There's going to be potentially even, if Congress were to act at all, they might do something where they say, hey, we're going to raise Social Security by 6% because of inflation. However, we're going to throw a provision in there that if you don't get the vaccine, we're only going to raise it 3%. Can they do that? Sure. Social Security, Medicare, all of that completely created by Congress using the commerce power in the Constitution. Congress has the power to tax and spend. They have the power to spend for the interstate commerce, yada, 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 yada. Not going to explain that all here, but I'm going to tell you Congress could do that. Somebody will probably challenge it in court. And I'm sure that gives some low-hanging fruit to the Republicans when they take back over and shut everything down. Remember, we're not very far away from the next election that's going to change a lot of what things look like today. So remember, that's where it all comes down to. Elections have consequences, especially off-year elections. They usually have consequences that involve the other party that's not in the White House taking over. And I think that's what's going to happen next year, but it's going to require all of us, all of you, to get out there and keep pushing. Let's see, what else do we have? My work will not accept a letter because Biden is mandating it. Well, he's supposedly and that's going to be the other question. The mandate for any employer over 100 people with any kind of federal contract. So I work for a company that's well over 100 people. They definitely have, within the larger company, some government contracts. They're looking into how they want to approach that. It's going to come down to multiple companies suing. When that happens, that'll go away. I'm not terribly worried about that. It's highly unlikely that every company in the United States is going to risk losing large numbers of employees in a tough labor market over a mandate for a vaccine that is hardly as effective as it was originally advertised. That's just, I guess that's an educated prognostication for everybody, but I kind of see it going that way. Let's see. Let me find some more. I heard some people in here making claims about legal knowledge and constitutional stuff, and I appreciate all the people that made it a point to step in and defend me. Sherry Steckler, you said in here, and I think it's Comirnaty is how you pronounce it, or something like that. Yes, that is the retail name of the Pfizer vaccine. However, I confirmed yesterday through a local Walgreens that they have both a remaining supply of the original vaccine with an emergency use authorization, which was extended, and Comirnaty in stock. You can get both at the Walgreens in Topeka, Kansas. So you can get it in Dayton, Ohio as well. So I know there's a lot of people out there saying that that's only available in Europe, and maybe when it first came down, it was more available in Europe than it is here. But basically, the way that works is at some point in time, let's say September 1st, every vaccine in existence was not fully approved by the FDA and falls under that emergency use authorization. On September 1st, every vaccine named Comirnaty, or however you pronounce that, got full FDA approval. But that shipment, that batch, may have been more prevalent in Europe than it is here. But I can promise you, because I have confirmed with my own telephone, that the Walgreens in most states, at least in Ohio and Kansas, have available the retail version of the Pfizer vaccine. Right, wrong, or otherwise, it is what it is. I just try to bring you guys facts that make sense. The first time one of my videos gets banned by Facebook and YouTube, I have enough time in my life to stay up all night and write a petition to the court and challenge it myself if that's what I have to do. Because I don't say anything on here that's not absolutely verifiable. I have my opinions, and I'll let you know what my opinions are when I have those. But if I'm giving you facts, I have researched them. In most cases, much, much, much better than the media has. And I try to explain it to folks in a way that they'll understand it better. Because the media always they're speaking from a worldview and from a batch of experience that is always going to be biased in a way that they don't even understand. They're not paid very well. First of all, you got to understand that people in the media are not paid, at least the producers, directors, people that make the stuff, are not paid very well. So they're not going to go out there and spend hours and hours and hours on every single story. They don't have the time, and they're not paid well enough to do it, frankly. So, you got to give them a little bit of a break there, I guess. Let's see. Not mandating the jab because they can't afford to lose employees. Judy, fantastic. That's great. I've seen several people saying the same thing. Obviously we saw what happened with Southwest. Let's go, Brandon. We saw what happened with American Airlines jumping on the same bandwagon. Lots of that stuff. That's fantastic. Great. More companies are going to start doing that, and that's going to ultimately mean that the mandate won't have any teeth because Joe Biden can't. It'll be extremely difficult to execute that against large employers, large corporations in the United States, over a long enough period of time. Because when Trump is reelected or Ron DeSantis is elected or whomever, all they got to do is right over the top of that executive order, and it goes away like it never existed. That's what Biden did. That's what Trump will do. That's why elections matter. That's why we have to win in 2022 and 2024. Let's see. Let's get a few more of these, because a mandate is not a law. Well, a mandate is certainly not a congressional law, and that's what the rest of the show is basically about. But I'll reiterate that a mandate coming from the president, even an executive order, is not a congressional law. And if an executive order contradicts or comes in any kind of battle with I don't know which one I said. Whenever a congressional law is up against an executive order, the congressional law wins, because they've had bicameralism and presentment, and there's a lot of things we could talk about that make that so. But the hierarchy goes like this: Constitution, and that includes substantive rights that come from the Constitution, even rights that the Supreme Court says comes from the Constitution, even though they're not expressly in the Constitution. Then congressional laws and rules that Congress passes that get signed by the president. We call that bicameralism and presentment. Then executive orders. Then state constitutional provisions. Then state laws, so on and so forth. State executive orders would be underneath that. So that's kind of the hierarchy of law in the United States. So mandate is not a law, you're right. An executive order has the force of law as long as it falls under something that the president controls, like the execution of laws. Southwest, fantastic. God, I love to hear that. I love to hear that. By Kamalism. No, I did not. I will not. I refuse to talk about Heels Up Harris. Okay, so that may violate community standards somewhere, because that may be considered bullying, but I won't talk about her on my shows. All right, I think Mrs. Producer's telling me it's time to wrap up. So here comes Mrs. Producer. She's about to come on camera. Hey. This is my time.
Well, I had to come to help you close out, because I don't even think you
Executive Order number 14043, 14043, signed on September 9th. And it lays out, as they are supposed to do, it lays out the provisions in the U.S. Code that he says he is trying to execute on. In this case, all it says is he's passing laws for the people that work for him, which he can do, just so you know. But everybody else who doesn't work for him, this mandate does not apply to you. And even if by some chance it does in some kind of a snaky little way, like this 100-employee nonsense, it's not going to work out. Go back and read Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. I encourage you to read that. That's probably going to fall under this twilight zone. And if that ever gets to the Supreme Court, our current Supreme Court is very unlikely to hold that Joe Biden's got that kind of power. And it may be moot by then, because like I said, we're going to have somebody else in 2024. Thank you all so much for liking, sharing this video, for watching. I had so many more questions come through about different things. I'll try to get to those next week. We may have to start doing this more than once a week. But keep those questions coming. I'm getting them on Facebook. Kaylee's getting some. Keep them coming. I will be sure to answer them. I have a feeling, because I know how these news cycles go, this week is going to have some news that's going to pertain to this show for next week. There's stuff coming down the pike. We've got Joe Biden potentially going to be implicated in the Hunter Biden investigation by the FBI, on and on and on and on. So there's some stuff coming. So I will work to try to answer as many of your questions as I can. But thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for tuning in to Primetime Patriots. Thanks for liking and sharing. Everybody, be blessed. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.